she cried. "Both my children died inside me." Her parents called her cursed, but one man stood by her. The sun hung low over the small town of Willow Creek, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters upon the dusty street. Dust swirled in lazy spirals, stirred by the occasional gust of wind that carried the faint scent of gunpowder and sweat from the saloon, where the laughter of men clashed with the melancholy of a fading day. Clara's shawl was frayed, much like her spirit, wrapped tightly around her shoulders as if it could shield her from the cruel tongues of the townsfolk. Once a vibrant mother, her laughter had filled the air as richly as the smell of rain-soaked earth, but 2 lives had slipped from her grasp, leaving her with nothing but a tarnished locket resting against her chest. Inside, the faded pictures of her twins bore witness to dreams turned to dust, yet for the townspeople, she was merely a cursed figure, an echo of tragedy that haunted their streets. Alone in her grief, she had long ago retreated from the community that failed to understand her suffering, her days dissolving into a monotonous routine of chores and silent tears, until Nathaniel Burns, the local blacksmith with his own scars, stepped into her life, holding the promise of something she thought lost forever. Nathaniel, with his sun-baked skin and roughened hands, often found himself lingering at the edge of Clara's yard. The rhythmic clang of his hammer against iron echoed through the bleak air, an honest sound that, for all its strength, seemed to soften when he thought of her. He had watched her from afar, the shawl winding tighter each day, as if she could wrap herself away from the prying eyes of Bell's Hollow. She was a sorrowful silhouette against the backdrop of a fading sunset, casting long shadows that stretched out like the unfulfilled hopes that clung to her spirit. As dusk descended, the scent of sagebrush mingled with the smoky tendrils from his forge. He could see Clara's figure in the flickering light of her lantern, a fragile flame battling the encroaching darkness. Stepping, almost hesitantly, onto her porch, he could feel the wooden planks creak beneath his weight, a reminder of his presence and the intrusion it might represent. The air was thick with unspoken words, hovering like the dust motes caught in the golden glow of her lantern. "Evening, Clara," he offered, his voice low, gentle, breaking the silence that had become her companion. She turned, startled but not unwelcoming, her dark eyes glimmering with a mix of surprise and caution. "Nathaniel." The weight of her voice cradled the syllables, as if she were testing the contours of his name on her tongue. "What brings you here at this hour?" "I brought you something," he said, lifting a small bundle swathed in an old cloth. The scent of freshly baked bread wafted from it, a simple offering, yet it felt monumental in the fragile space between them. "Thought you might." "Why?" The question erupted like a gunshot, her defenses flaring. "Why would you waste your time on someone like me?" The emotions spilled from her, raw and jagged, as though the pain of being unworthy had pierced her soul again. "Because," he replied, taking a step closer, "you're not what the town says you are. You're more than their whispers." The truth in his words, simple yet profound, hung in the air. Clara was enveloped in the warmth of his sincerity, caught between appreciation and disbelief. His gaze softened as he watched her wrestle with an internal storm. Here was a man who wore his burdens openly, much like her own. A flicker of recognition passed between them, an understanding carved from shared grief. They were 2 souls marked by loss, yet the promise of their connection shimmered amid the encroaching shadows. The hesitation in her heart began to dissolve, replaced with an unfamiliar stirring. For too long, she had been shackled by her sorrows, confined to the edges of a life she once embraced. Slowly, she reached for the offering, her fingers brushing against his, electric and tentative. "Thank you," she murmured, a crack in her voice betraying the weight she had carried for far too long. Nathaniel's heart thrummed in response, a silent vow intertwining with the air around them. This moment, their moment, could be a turning point, a chance for healing amid the desolation. In that fading light, they stood at a precipice, the dust of the Old West swirling around them. Yet within that tempest, a seed of hope began to take root. The air grew thick with anticipation, a mixture of dust and unspoken words swirling around them. Nathaniel's gaze drifted to the ground, where the sun's last glow clung to the hard earth like a dying ember. He could feel Abigail's presence, a gentle warmth against the cold backdrop of their reality, a connection forged in silence that often spoke louder than any gunfight. "Do you ever think about running?" Abigail's voice, soft yet edged with steel, broke through the stillness. She stared at the horizon, where shadows stretched long like secrets waiting to be unveiled. "Every damn day," Nathaniel replied, his throat dry. He brushed a hand over his face, feeling the grit of the trail that had followed him like a curse. "But where would we go?" Out there, it's just as unforgiving. Abigail turned, her eyes fierce and searching, filled with the remnants of dreams she'd dared to clasp. Anywhere but here. The wind caught a stray curl of hair, framing her face like a halo of defiance. We're not just meant to survive, Nathaniel. We deserve more than this. A sharp bite of regret pierced him, mingling with the dust. He recalled the last 3 years, each moment a reminder of the harshness that bound them, the sheriff's scorn, the weight of debts unpaid, and the vicious whispers of townsfolk who had turned their backs. "It's not that simple," he murmured, barely louder than a whisper, as if the very air might betray him. "Why not?" she challenged, her spirit undeterred. "If we stay, we'll end up like the dry bones scattered out there." She gestured toward the barren landscape, where remnants of old lives lay exposed under the relentless sun. "I can't live like that any longer." His heart ached with the truth of her words. Nathaniel could feel his resolve cracking, as if the very ground beneath him was shifting. "I can't lose you," he said, each syllable heavy with weight. "If we try to leave, what happens if? What if? What ifs will bury us alive," Abigail interjected, her voice rising above the gathering dusk. "You think I'm afraid of the danger out there? I'm terrified of this emptiness." Silence enveloped them again, palpable and alive, charged with unfulfilled dreams and the scent of gunpowder lingering from distant skirmishes. It smelled of longing, and Nathaniel could almost taste the bittersweet fear that clung to them both. "Tonight we'll gather what we need," he said finally, swinging into action despite the tremor in his hands. The instinct to protect flared within him, and he felt the pull of responsibility of something greater than himself. "Tomorrow, we make our move." He watched as a flicker of hope ignited in Abigail's eyes, a light amidst the encroaching shadows. In that moment she stepped closer, a shared resolve binding them. The weight of uncertainty lingered, but together, they forged a fragile pact against the unforgiving world that had sought to break them. The lantern's glow nearby illuminated her features, casting shifting shadows that danced across the dust. He could almost believe that redemption lay just beyond the horizon, waiting for them to chase it down. She shifted slightly, her eyes catching the flicker of the lantern with a glimmer of something unspoken. The dim light revealed the bruised edges of her resolve, the shadows of defeat lurking in the corners of her soft features. For a moment, he felt like a warrior about to march into battle, armed only with the hope that flickered in her gaze. "Have you ever seen a sunset paint the sky red as blood?" she asked, breaking the silence that hung heavy between them. Her voice was a whisper, as if the weight of the question could shatter the night. He nodded, remembering a time when the world felt right, before the injustices had clawed at his soul. "I thought I was free," she continued, the words laced with the bitterness of memory, "but freedom wears chains that are unseen." The night air was thick with the scent of gunpowder, and he could feel the echoes of distant gunfire in his bones, a reminder of the lawlessness that passed for justice in these parts. The sheriff was little more than a name on a wanted poster, an empty promise of protection hanging in the saloon where men wagered their lives for a shot of whiskey. He took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm within him, searching for the right words. But all he could summon was silence, a silent vow to guard her as best he could. With each passing moment, the dust settled around them like an unwelcome shroud. He noticed the tremor in her hands as she reached for the remnants of her hope, a small locket that had once belonged to her mother, now a chilling reminder of the life she had lost. The metal was cold against her skin, a stark contrast to the warmth of memories. "When they took all this from me, I thought I had nothing left," she murmured, clutching the locket tighter. "But now, now I see there might still be a chance." He felt a lump form in his throat, the weight of her pain pressing down on him. He couldn't allow her fragility to slip through his fingers like sand. "You have me," he said, the words tumbling out before he could think better of them. "Whatever it takes, I won't let them take anything else from you." The shadows danced in the corners of their makeshift camp, an audience to the unspoken promise that hung in the air. He detected the scent of smoke curling from the remnants of long-doused campfires, blending with the dust that settled into his lungs, a gritty reminder of life in this forsaken land. He could see the flickers of doubt in her eyes, told him she was weighing the sincerity of his words against a lifetime of betrayal. "I can't ask you to risk your life for me," she replied, the vulnerability in her voice as sharp as a knife's edge, cutting through the ambient noise of the night. "You didn't ask." "I'm offering," he replied, his tone firmer than he felt. It was a gamble, but he could see the glimmer of hope in her demeanor beginning to crack through the layers of despair. "We can face this together. Just trust me." In that moment he saw her barriers waver. The light of the lantern flickered, casting a warm glow that illuminated the tension etched in her brow. Trust. It's a dangerous thing in a world like this, she said, her voice lower now, almost vulnerable. You've no reason to trust me either. He leaned closer, his voice a low murmur, letting the weight of his words sink in. That's true, but trust is built, one act at a time. The world has thrown us into this mess, but we don't have to let it define us. The wind shifted, a chill wrapping around them as if urging them to take cover from an impending storm. Her eyes searched his, looking for signs of dishonesty, and he could feel the tension pulling taut between them as the night deepened. But slowly, like dawn breaking through the dark, a flicker of understanding emerged. Then let's start building, she said, her voice stronger now, almost defiant. The spark of determination she displayed ignited something deep within him, a thrill that melded with the gravity of their situation. Just as he felt the tide of their shared resolve rising, the distant sound of hoofbeats stirred the air, growing louder, relentless. He could feel the tightening in his chest, instinct screaming for caution. "Get behind me," he ordered, urgency in his voice. The ground trembled under the weight of approaching riders, their silhouettes cutting through the night like harbingers of doom. The glow of distant lanterns bobbed in the distance, and his heart raced as he scanned the horizon. Stay low. A flash of light flickered, illuminating the faces of men who reveled in chaos, the promise of violence glinting in their eyes. He could taste the dust of their arrogance mingling with the grit of his fear. The weight of her presence behind him gave him strength. Whatever the outcome, he knew one thing: he would protect her with everything he had. As they drew nearer, the laughter of the riders echoed ominously in the silence. The stakes had been raised, and the darkness of their intentions loomed heavy. It was no longer just about survival. They were now caught in a game of power, but he resolved to fight for her, because sometimes hope is born from the shadows of despair, and together they could carve their path through the night. The tension crackled like electricity as the riders approached, and he felt the resolve swelling in his chest, ready to face the storm. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that danced along the dusty ground as Ezekiel Marsh tightened the grip on his saddle horn. The approaching riders, 5 silhouettes etched against the horizon, bore the weight of inevitability, their horses kicking up clouds of dust that hung in the dry evening air like ghosts of long-gone souls. Ezekiel's heart thudded in time with the rhythmic pounding of hooves, each beat a reminder of the stakes laid bare before him. "Ezekiel," a voice broke through his thoughts, low and steady like the murmurs of a river. It was Samuel, his partner, fear etched across his weathered face. "This might not go the way you hope. You're standing alone against a pack of wolves." Ezekiel turned to meet Samuel's anxious gaze, the lantern glow from the saloon behind them flickering like a heartbeat. "They can't take what's not theirs, Sam, not this time." His voice carried a conviction that felt like armor, even as doubt clawed at the edges of his resolve. He had set his sights not only on defending his land, but on redeeming a past tarnished by the shadows of injustice. As the riders closed in, Ezekiel's thoughts drifted to the last encounter with the McCall brothers. Their laughter had resonated in the air like the crack of a whip, a reminder of the power they wielded like a badge. They had come to settle a score born from years of simmering resentment, and he was determined to stand against their tyranny, not as a desperate man, but as a protector of those who couldn't stand for themselves. "The sun's almost down," Ezekiel replied, glancing towards the fiery orb surrendering to the horizon. "Let's settle this like men." Samuel nodded, though his eyes told a different story, one of fear for Ezekiel's safety and shared history that bound them more tightly than any blood could. As the brothers rode closer, Ezekiel's stance widened, the muscles in his legs tightening as if ready to launch him forward. He could smell the gunpowder hanging faintly in the air, mingling with the scent of sweat and leather. The lead rider, a tall figure cloaked in a tattered duster, raised a hand, signaling them to halt. Silence fell, thick and suffocating, as if the world held its breath. "Ezekiel Marsh," the lead rider called, voice gravelly like the parched earth beneath their feet. "You've been a thorn in our side long enough. It's time you learn your place in this territory." Ezekiel's jaw clenched, and he felt a surge of anger rise like a tide ready to crash. "And you've overstayed your welcome, McCall. I won't let you trample on the innocent anymore." The words hung in the air, a challenge that crackled with the electricity of confrontation. Behind him, he could sense Samuel's tension, his own heart racing as the riders shifted, assessing the lone man standing against a tide of intimidation. But then, unexpectedly, a flicker of movement caught Ezekiel's eye. From the shadows of the saloon, a figure emerged, Clara, the barmaid whose kindness had often been a balm for his weary soul. She stood with her arms crossed, defiance lighting her features. "Leave him be," Clara called, her voice steady and strong, piercing through the malevolence surrounding them. "You've terrorized this town long enough, and we won't stand by while you bully the good folks here." Ezekiel felt a warmth blossom in his chest, a shift in the atmosphere sparked by her unwavering support. The riders hesitated, and in that brief moment of uncertainty, Ezekiel caught a glimpse of a way to turn the tide. "Clara's right," he said, his voice ringing clearer, emboldened by her courage. "You think your strength lies in fear, but it's the loyalty of the people you underestimate that will bring you down." The McCall brothers exchanged glances, their confidence faltering as the townsfolk began to gather in the shadows. Drawn by the tension that crackled like a summer storm, the scent of fear was thick in the air, but now mingled with a newfound hope. The realization that they weren't alone began to seep into Ezekiel's bones as whispers of solidarity circulated amidst the crowd. "Look around, McCall. Your reign ends here." Ezekiel's words flowed with the weight of something deeper, an undercurrent of justice rising within. He could feel the pulse of the earth beneath him, a reminder of all that was at stake. But it was the flicker of a lantern flame that broke through the charged silence. An elderly man stepped forward, a farmer with hands hardened by years of toil. "I've buried too many good folks because of your kind. It ends here. We stand with Ezekiel." As the voices erupted in agreement, Ezekiel felt a surge of something he'd buried for too long, the strength of community. He wasn't alone in this fight. The faces of those he'd protected were now beside him, forming a line of defense against tyranny. "Now you've stirred the pot," McCall grunted, his bravado cracking as he realized the tide had shifted. The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and the promise of confrontation as the riders shifted nervously, their bravado waning. Ezekiel straightened, heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilarating determination. The moment had come, and everything hung in the balance. A reckoning loomed on the horizon, and he would not back down. The time for justice had come, a pulse of redemption igniting with Ezekiel's fingers closed around the handle of his revolver, the cold steel biting into his skin. The saloon's door swung open, creaking like a mournful ghost as he stepped inside. The air hung thick with the scent of sweat, whiskey, and the lingering echo of despair. Lanterns flickered overhead, casting shadows that danced like the spirits of the lost. He was acutely aware of every gaze resting on him, some curious, others filled with unspoken judgment, and a few that dared to harbinger violence. At the far end of the bar, he found the sheriff. Liam Grayson sat there, nursing a drink, his hat pulled low over eyes that had seen too much, but not enough to change him. "What do you want, Ezekiel?" Grayson drawled, the words heavy with contempt. "I want justice," Ezekiel replied, his voice steady despite the tumult inside him. "They took everything from me, and I'm done waiting," Grayson scoffed, pushing his glass aside. "And what do you think you can? You're a lone wolf howling against the pack. You've got no one to back you." "That's not true," he said, the fervor in his chest igniting. "I've got the truth on my side. I've got her." The image of Ayanna flashed in his mind, the strength in her gaze, her laughter that lingered like a forgotten song. The thought of her made his resolve harden. "Her?" Grayson echoed, disbelief curling his lip. "You think she'll stand with you, an Apache woman? You're dreaming." "Enough." Ezekiel slammed a hand against the bar, the wood splintering slightly under the force. Murmurs erupted like angry bees in the crowd. He turned to face them, the heat of their scrutiny pressing on his back. "You can mock me, you can turn away, but I'm not alone. I know what I need to do." The sheriff leaned back, the wooden chair creaking beneath him. "And what would that be? You plan to bring down the Thompson gang just like that?" He snapped his fingers, the sound sharp in the thick air. "They'll turn you into dust." Ezekiel felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the room. It was suffocating. Yet there was something else, an undercurrent of solidarity, a flicker of respect. He had awakened something in this town, a recognition of the injustice that sprawled like a spider's web, ensnaring everyone. "I aim to gather a posse," he stated, a quiet conviction anchoring his voice. "I'll find those men who did this. You can keep your badge and your whiskey, but mark my words. This ends now." The sheriff's face darkened, the lines around his mouth tightening. "You think you can just waltz in here and rally a bunch of drunks to fight a war? You ain't cut from the same cloth as them, Ezekiel. You'll end up 6 feet under." Ezekiel straightened, the familiar blend of fear and exhilaration surging once more, but deeper this time. "Then I'll either be a hero or a martyr, but I will not stand idly by." He turned and walked out, each step heavier than the last, yet somehow lighter with purpose. The sun hung low on the horizon as he crossed back into the fading light of day. Dust swirled in the warm breeze, twisting like memories of happier times. He made his way toward the livery, where a promise of freedom awaited him in the form of his stallion, Thunder. With every step, determination coiled tighter within him, fueled by the knowledge that this was not just about him. It was for Ayanna, for anyone who had been wronged. As he saddled Thunder, the familiar touch of the leather against his skin calmed the storm brewing in his heart. He looked into the horse's intelligent eyes, finding an echo of the courage he needed. It wasn't just the horse, it was the spirit of all those he had lost. "Let's find them, boy," he whispered, and Thunder snorted in response. Hours later, under the pale glow of lantern light, Ezekiel stood at the edge of town, surveying a handful of faces illuminated in soft gold. There was Cassie, the barkeep with a heart of gold; Jonah, a former deputy with a thirst for redemption; and old Sam, who had seen the rise and fall of too many, now clinging to the hope of justice. "Ezekiel," Cassie said softly, her voice a warm breeze, "we're with you. We've all had enough. We're tired of being pushed down." "Then it's time we push back," he replied, a fire igniting in his chest. "We'll start by riding out to Thompson's hideout before dawn. I don't want to waste another moment." Jonah nodded, a silent promise echoed in his eyes. Sam tightened his grip on an old rifle. They were ready, and in that moment Ezekiel felt a surge of strength. As the sun sank further, casting long shadows over the gathered group, they spoke in hushed tones, fears and hopes melding together. The air crackled with unspoken courage, and Ezekiel realized he wasn't just gathering a posse. They were creating a family bound by scars and the desire to reclaim their lives. Just as they began to disperse, a chill crept through the air. A distant rumble of thunder echoed, but it wasn't the storm carving through the horizon. No, this storm was gathering within him, a reckoning of fate, looming and inevitable. He took a deep breath, tasting the dust of the road and the promise of something new. "Tomorrow," he murmured to himself, "we fight for more than justice. We fight for redemption." And with that thought he embraced the darkness, ready to carve out a dawn from it. The night settled like a heavy blanket, muffling the protests of the town, a crooked spine of silhouettes and flickering lanterns. Shadows danced along the saloon walls, laughter punctuated by the clinking of glasses. Yet there was an unease lurking just beyond the revelry. Ezekiel stepped into that uneasy arena, his heart racing with purpose that battled against the familiar specter of doubt. He navigated through the crowd, each face reflecting flickers of light and darker intentions. The air was thick with the scent of whiskey and sweat, the echoes of broken dreams mingling with the occasional shout of triumph. He remembered the way his father had stared down the barrel of a gun, the grim determination etched on his brow. Ezekiel sought that same resolve, but tonight felt different. Tonight was not about fear. Near the bar, a group of men engaged in raucous conversation, their laughter a sharp contrast to the tension tightening in Ezekiel's chest. He spotted Jack, his old ally, nursing a drink with a faraway look etched across his face. "You ready for what's coming?" Ezekiel leaned in, his voice low but firm, enough to make Jack's gaze snap back to the present. "I was ready when they stung us in the first place," Jack muttered, a bitter edge sharpening his words. "But you know how this goes. Retribution comes at a price, and it's always paid in blood." Ezekiel felt the weight of that truth settle in his gut. He had long come to terms with the morality of their fight. "We fight for what's right," he reminded Jack, though his own voice wavered beneath the surface. "For the ones who can't." Jack rolled the glass in his hand, the ice clinking like distant gunfire. "Right and wrong don't exist in this world, Ezekiel. Just survival." The firelight caught the scars on Jack's weathered hands, speaking volumes of battles fought and lost, both against men and within himself. The door swung open with a groan, dust swirling in like a specter. A figure stepped inside, silhouetted against the lantern glow, tall and cloaked in shadows. The saloon fell silent, the air thickening with anticipation. Ezekiel's instincts flared. Every nerve tingled as he recognized the newcomer. It was Clara, her presence electrifying and unsettling all at once. "Ezekiel," her voice cut through the silence, smooth and sharp as a knife. "You're making a grave mistake, Clara. You shouldn't be here," he replied, his heart racing with unspoken thoughts. Her eyes glimmered like dark jewels, fierce yet vulnerable. He could see the torment behind her facade, the weight of choices made, of lives caught in the crossfire. Her gaze dropped to the floor, and for a moment, the chaos of the saloon faded. "You think this is about justice? They don't care about justice, This is revenge, and it's a monster you can't tame. I won't let fear dictate my choices." His voice steadied, the warmth of determination igniting within. The shadows flickered between them, but she stepped closer. and he caught the faint odor of gunpowder mingling with the delicate scent of her lavender, so remnants of another life. "Every choice has consequences," she whispered, her words heavy with unshed tears. "And I'd rather fight alongside you than watch you become another ghost in this damn town." Ezekiel searched her eyes, seeing the fierce protector buried beneath layers of hurt and sorrow. "Then, stand with me. Be a part of something bigger than ourselves." The tension hung thick between them, a linchpin in the fragile fabric of their past. Clara hesitated, a myriad of emotions playing across her features. A storm brewed in her heart. She could feel the gravity of his call. "If we do this together, we'll need a plan." A clamor erupted outside, the kind that could only mean trouble was brewing. The sound of horses and shouting, casting an ominous shadow over the saloon. "It's too late for plans," Ezekiel declared, adrenaline surging through him. "We must act now." They burst out of the saloon, the night air stark and alive, the scent of impending rain brushing against their skin. The town's main street lay bare, the moon glinting off unsheathed blades and anxious faces. A mob had formed, a raucous assembly of souls seeking vengeance. Driven by pain and fury, the very forces Ezekiel had hoped to quell. "Everyone, step back," he shouted, raising his hands, but the crowd surged forward, emboldened by desperation. Clara stood at his side, her presence a quiet flame of strength, reflecting the tenacity he needed. In that moment, Ezekiel realized that the fight he had hoped for wasn't merely against flesh and blood, but against the echo of injustice that permeated the very town they called home. He felt the weight of her belief in him, heavy and reassuring as she gripped his arm. "Together," she said, her voice steady. "We confront it together." Their resolve ignited, a fire that refused to be dimmed. Ezekiel nodded, determination etched into every line of his face. The confrontation ahead would not be simple. The darkness looming over them was formidable, but with Clara at his side, he felt a surge of defiance. "Let's show them what it means to stand for something," he proclaimed, and together they stepped into the fray, ready to carve their names into the annals of redemption. Amidst a storm brewing in the heart of the Old West, the dust settled slowly as they marched into the saloon, each footstep like thunder on the wooden floorboards. The patrons halted their chatter, eyes wide and mouths slack, as if a pack of wolves had entered their sheepfold. Jack's gaze swept across the barroom, taking in the faces hardened by toil, stained by whiskey, but alive with something wild that danced just beneath the surface. He felt the weight of his revolver heavy against his hip, a constant reminder of the choices he had made. The smell of sweat mixed with the pungent aroma of spilled beer hung thick in the air. A single lantern swung above, casting shadows that flickered like restless spirits watching from the corners. "Well, look who decided to join us," sneered a voice from the back. It was Hank, the local sheriff, his badge glinting dully under the lantern glow. He leaned against the wall with an ease that belied the tension thickening around them. "You boys think you can just show up here, stir up trouble, and walk away clean." Jack stepped forward, his jaw clenched. "We're not here for trouble, Hank. We're here to make things right." The room held its breath, caught between his audacity and the sheriff's palpable disdain. "Make things right," Hank chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "Is that what you call it when you ride into town like a hero? You don't even know what you're asking for." The words hung heavy, but Jack refused to back down. He turned to his comrades, their faces glinting with courage and resolve. They had all come to the Old West seeking redemption, fleeing shadows of their pasts, but now they stood together, a force of nature against the injustice that had plagued these lands for too long. "Hank, you know the truth." One of his friends, Luis, stepped forward, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in the air. "You've turned a blind eye to the very people who need your help, the ones who've suffered while you sip whiskey and pretend to be a lawman." The sheriff's lips tightened, anger surfacing like a snake ready to strike. "Watch your mouth, or you'll be tasting the floor sooner than you think." The tension in the room crackled, every person silently weighing the options. A man could lose his life over a mere whisper in this town, but Jack felt the heat of something stirring deep within him. It wasn't just fear, it was purpose. As the moment stretched, Jack remembered the story of an old miner he met days ago at a creek while washing his hands. The miner spoke of when the land had life, the trees thick with leaves, water clear as crystal, laughter echoing where now only silence reigned. "It's the spirit of the land," he had said, "that keeps us going." Then a shout pierced through the thickening fog of tension. A woman burst through the saloon doors, her dress torn and stained, hair wild as if she had been through Hell's Own gate. The room turned to her, a collective gasp of recognition. It was Clara, the innkeeper's daughter, rumored to have been taken by a band of outlaws weeks before. "Help!" she cried, her voice raw and choked. They're coming back! They're coming for us all!" The atmosphere shifted, now electric with urgency. Jack instinctively stepped towards her. The vulnerability in her eyes ignited something fierce within him. Amidst the chaos and drink, this was the anchor they needed. Hank's bravado faltered, the sheriff's expression morphing from sneer to concern. "What do you mean, Clara?" "They've been hiding out at the old mine," she gasped, hands trembling. "They're planning to raid the town tonight." A murmur spread like wildfire through the crowd. Faces that had once shown indifference now turned to determination, igniting a spark of courage. Jack exchanged glances with his comrades, and it was as if a silent agreement passed between them. They would not let fear dictate the fate of this town any longer. "We need to rally the men," Jack said firmly, drawing the attention of the room. "If we want to stand a chance against them, we have to fight together. Otherwise, this town will drown in its own shadows." Hank straightened, a flicker of respect crossing his features. Perhaps the weight of his badge pressed down harder than he wanted to admit. "I'll gather the deputies," he said, voice steadier now. "But you're leading the charge." Relief washed over Jack, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. He had never expected the sheriff to concede. "We need to move fast. Clara, you stay behind and make sure the women and children are safe." "I won't hide," she shot back defiantly. "You think I'll cower while my friends are in danger? I can fight." Jack felt admiration swell. This was no damsel in distress. This was a warrior in the making. "Then fight with us. We'll need every hand we can get." The saloon transformed from a place of idle chatter to a war room as residents gathered, ignited by a sense of purpose. Jack felt the thrumming of hope rising within him, a warmth blossoming in the center of his chest. They were no longer alone. They had become a community, bound by the desire for justice. As they stepped outside into the suffocating heat of the day, the horizon loomed with a storm, both metaphorical and real. The air crackled, charged with tension, ready to explode into chaos. But Jack stood tall, ready to fight for those who could not, feeling the pull of destiny wrapping around him like the saddle against his back. As the storm rolled in, dark clouds swirling like the chaos within Clara's heart, Jack stood with the tarnished locket in his hand, its weight heavy like the dust in the air. Memories flooded him, images of the twins' innocent smiles, now ghosts of lost hope. He looked to Clara, her eyes reflecting the tempest brewing above and the sadness that had bound them since their shared loss. The sheriff, a figure of wavering justice, emerged from the shadows of the saloon, his face lined with years of watching a town wrestle with its own demons. The weight of the townsfolk's judgment hung over him, the murmurs and whispers that labeled Clara a pariah for the tragic accident that had stolen her children. He paused, glancing at Jack, who held the locket like a beacon of truth. "Justice is a crooked road," he said, his voice low, but the storm echoed his sense of urgency. "It twists and turns, but it leads to redemption or ruin." With a nod, Jack stepped forward, the locket gleaming in the lantern glow like a star fallen to earth. "This belongs to Clara," he declared, his voice cutting through the encroaching storm. "It's time for the truth." He turned to the gathering crowd, each face a storm of curiosity and doubt. "What you know is not the whole story. Clara is not to blame." Whispers erupted among the townsfolk, but Clara remained silent, rooted to the earth. The secret of her loss hung in the air like the electric charge before a lightning strike. As Jack continued, the wind howled, pushing against him as if trying to silence the truth. The night of the fire, Clara tried to save them. She loved them fiercely, more than any of you can understand. The storm raged above, mirroring the turmoil below, as if nature itself was pleading for compassion and understanding. The sheriff stepped closer, the weight of his badge pressing heavy against his chest. Yet the pang of guilt twisted at his heart. What if what she faced was more than just an accident? He called out, his voice rising above the thrashing winds. What if she was hiding a truth that haunts her still? Clara swallowed hard, her voice trembling like the branches of the trees lining the street. "I didn't speak up because I thought I would lose you all," she whispered, tears mixing with the rain that began to fall, each drop a memory, a longing for connection. "I tried to shield you from my pain, but it only grew." A silence fell over the crowd, thick and heavy as the rain washed over the dust, cleansing it, as if the storm could purify their hearts. Nathaniel stepped forward, breaking the tension with a gesture of unyielding kindness, his hand reaching for hers. "Clara," he said softly, "we know grief, but love can break those chains. You don't have to carry this burden alone." The weight of judgment began to lift, replaced by compassion as Clara accepted Nathaniel's hand, their fingers intertwining, a bond stronger than the storms that raged around them. Jack watched as the townsfolk shifted, their faces softening through the rain. The sheriff, at last, moved to stand beside them. "Let this be a new beginning," he declared, lifting his chin. "We stand together, not against one another. It's time we support those among us who are most vulnerable." The storm began to subside, the clouds parting just enough for the first hints of light to break through. In that moment, Clara finally felt the locket's weight lift. It no longer represented loss, but the promise of redemption. All around her, hearts opened like petals, ready to bloom in the light of forgiveness. Outside the saloon, the dust settled, and Clara faced the horizon, hopeful. The storm had passed, leaving a fragile glimmer of hope, a second chance for love and acceptance in the Old West. Years later, the townsfolk of Willow Creek gathered under the old oak tree, the air sweetened by wildflowers, laughter echoing where shadows once loomed. Clara, now a matriarch, shared stories of redemption and resilience, her children weaving between the legs of newfound friends, proof that bonds forged in adversity could bloom into a legacy of kindness. And as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, the promise of unity lingered, whispering that even the deepest wounds could heal, given time and compassion.